In order to take stock of the Slovak Council Presidency, Prime Minister Robert Fico, you have the floor.
Vážený pán predseda,
distinguished President of the European Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, already back in July I was standing here and I said that the Europeans consider today the achievements of the European integration, such as peace, passport-free travel, the ability to pay with a single currency, or the ability to choose a country where they want to live and work, and they take it for granted. But which is even worse, many in Europe believe that this matter that they take for granted would be here even without the EU. And what's more, that our lives would perhaps be easier without the EU. Let's now look at the truth. The EU is in the deepest crisis from its creation. This, however, is not a crisis coming from the external factors. It's an internal crisis caused by the lack of trust of the citizens of Europe. The discussions about the future of the EU throughout this year have completely turned around. Just ask any average European whether they know which country should be the next one to access the EU. They will say that they don't know, but they know very well which country should leave the EU. Nowhere else in the world is there a group of countries in any way similar to the EU. All of us have started the most difficult path. On the one hand, we respect many national particularities, we stick to our national identities, and at the same time, many of the essential powers we've handed over to the common power bodies. Now it's time to come to find an answer to the question whether these powers that have been granted to the EU should be maintained and whether it in any way endangers our roots, and whether instead of our common endeavor it threatens actually our common project. So this union, unique in the world, is under great danger. To stop this huge danger, we need to answer the questions: where are our rules? The rules are in the economic cooperation, in the common security, in the maintaining of our common peace. Let's not impose our citizens other topics than these topics, because if they don't identify with them, if they don't manage to believe them, they will turn their backs to the EU for good. The Slovak Republic took over the presidency of the EU Council in July with the ambition to react to the current situation. The first step forward was the Bratislava summit. It kicked off the long overdue discussion about how to make the EU better, safer, more efficient. What has actually happened in the EU? What is going on in the EU today? What are our expectations? What should be the future of the EU, where we failed, and so on? And all of these questions have been discussed, and on the 16th of September we've kick-started the so-called Bratislava process that should come to culmination next year in March, when we will mark the anniversary of the signature of the Treaty of Rome. Another great truth is that we also put the EU in danger by pursuing inner political agendas of the member states. For instance, various referenda taking place in the member states, they are motivated through inner political factors, and yet their results have an impact on the entire EU. And all of a sudden, they become something I might call our common problem even. And if this trend was to continue, the EU will be preoccupied with the inner political matters of the member states. We will be forced to look for overly complicated solutions. We would be forced to compromise on our basic principles, and this will cost us very dearly the credibility of the EU. If this was to continue, I think we will lack the political energy and the ability to deal with the fundamental problems of the EU. I'd like to appeal to the European leaders to stop trying to deal with their domestic agenda at the expense of the European agenda. We all know very well, and yet we find it difficult to admit, that the UK referendum was a purely inner political matter in which the national politicians failed. We know that the referendum in Italy was yet again an inner political matter, and here also those politicians failed. But when we're discussing if there was to be a referendum about whether Italy should leave or remain in the Eurozone, this would be potentially catastrophic for the EU. So that's why I appeal to all the EU leaders to stop dealing with their national agendas at the EU level. The current crises of the EU should be seen as a great impetus that should make us take measures for the benefit of the future of the EU. We should also take this opportunity and to try and create new, more efficient communication channels with our citizens. It's alarming that, according to the recent surveys, 57% of young Europeans feel that they're marginalized due to the recent crisis, that they're excluded from the social and economic life in their country. It's up to us, political leaders, to give our citizens not only hope, but to assure them that we're able to deal with the crisis, and that despite the unpredictability of the external factors, we can have our common cause under control. We need to build on the common values of our community. The EU as a safe haven where democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights and freedom and solidarity are the basic and timeless pillars of our common existence. But the EU also as a modern hub of digital progress and innovations, the EU as a driving engine in the fight against climate change, the EU as the greatest donor of development aid worldwide. The EU can be strong only if it's united. This was also one of the conclusions of the Bratislava summit. The 27 member states are determined to overcome the current and future challenges together. The reflection process, however necessary though, is not sufficient in itself. Even the greatest idea is worthless without action, and therefore the Bratislava summit wasn't only about reflection, but mainly about concrete steps to ensure that the EU is more comprehensible to the citizens, and also that it's able to offer the citizens a safer and better living area. And when I speak about security, I don't only mean internal, external security, fight against terrorism, but also economic and social security, job security, income security, as well as climate security. All of these are areas that worry our citizens mostly. Not playing with words that we want to change in the treaties and not discussing whether we want more EU or less EU. The EU citizens want to see a union that is economically strong, that can bring about new jobs and economic growth. A few months I was standing here and I said that if we want such a union, we need to use the financial instruments that we already have more efficiently. And this ambition has become now a practice. We now have, thanks to the great cooperation between the Council and the Parliament, a new budget for 2017, which is flexible, which is balanced, and above all, which reflects our current priorities. And this is great news. After all, thanks to this new budget, we'll manage to increase the funds for the jobs and growth support by 12%. We'll also be better placed to manage the root causes of migration, as well as to increase the security of our external borders. The EU citizens also call for new investment opportunities for Europe, and therefore I'm particularly pleased that the prolongation and the increase of the European Fund for Strategic Investments has become closer to reality. Through the support of public investments, we can thus create impetus for private investments that can in turn bring about jobs and growth. The EU citizens also want to have jobs so that they can provide for themselves and their families. Already today, the single market is creating new jobs, and it makes our lives easier. Finalizing it and making it into a digital single market will create vast new opportunities. Therefore, I'm particularly pleased that we managed some progress in this area. For instance, unjustified geo-blocking will hopefully become a blast from the past very soon. This will help consumers as well as businesses. Then discrimination based on residence, on citizenship, has nothing to do in the EU. The EU citizens have to have the same rights in digital area as well as elsewhere, and this also goes for the roaming fees. In order to use the full potential of the single market, we need to have affordable, stable energy sources.
Posunúť energetická únia. Ešte aj počas posledných dní nášho predsedníctva spoločne pracujeme na tom, aby sme úniu posunuli ďalej aj v tejto oblasti. Neoddeliteľnou súčasťou energetickej únie je aj ambíciou.
Furthermore, an ambitious and effective climate policy is also an integral part of our energy union. Ratification of the Paris Agreement by the European Union sealed it as a global leader in fighting climate change. We have conveyed an important message to the outside world that we are prepared to face global challenges, assume responsibility, and closely cooperate. When speaking about challenges, I have to touch upon migration. Today, we are more than aware that the migration crisis is no seasonal nor regional matter, but a problem of global scale. Although our positions on how to tackle this problem may vary, EU citizens expect us to demonstrate a constructive joint effort. I find it consoling that recently we have proven our capability to reach an agreement if we truly want and to advance in this agenda. A wonderful example of this effort is the European Coast and Border Guard that launched its operation on the 6th of October, thanks to swift and effective cooperation of the European Parliament and Council. One could not speak about migration without referring to responsibility, accountability, and solidarity. These concepts have stirred diverse emotions in the recent months. I am sure all of us are of the view that each and every member state must, in case of need, extend a helping hand without a sign of hesitation. Moreover, I believe that we should take into consideration the real possibilities, capacities of individual member states. In the recent months, I was pleased to experience an open discussion on complex topics. This applies also to the proposal of the Slovak Presidency concerning so-called effective solidarity. I do hope that this concept will be one of the first parts of the mosaic underpinning the reform of the common European asylum system. There is a lot of work ahead of us. Apart from the protection of our external borders, we are bound to ensure a functioning Schengen system, close cooperation with third countries, particularly transit ones and countries of migrants' origin, and to eliminate the causes of migration. This could be facilitated by the deliverables of the European Fund for Sustainable Development. Its objectives are to address the root causes of migration, and we must understand that stability and availability of economic opportunities in these countries will be at the heart of our endeavor to track root causes. EU citizens want to enjoy the feeling of stability. In today's world of uncertainty, the EU should symbolize a stronghold to them. In order to truly be a stable, secure and prospering place to live, we need good relations with our neighbors as well as with more remote allies. And this represents the quintessence of the global strategy on foreign and security policy. Let's say the American administration changes opinion regarding Russian sanctions. How shall we respond? And the proof is in the pudding. We'll see what opinions, how strong they are. We may yet face a problem that is indicated by the American administration, and that is weakening its presence and engagement in the European environment. I'd also like to mention the great success of the Warsaw Declaration of EU and NATO leaders on the strengthening of mutual strategic cooperation of both organizations. The resilience of EU can be boosted by an efficient enlargement policy. This is of key importance when it comes to fostering transformation and ensuring stability in Southeast Europe. This objective led us when opening new chapters of the accession process with Montenegro and Serbia, and we have noted a positive turn after receiving an application from Bosnia and Herzegovina aspiring to become once an EU member. We must do our utmost to facilitate the process of such political and economic reforms in candidate countries that will bring them closer to the Union and that will cement the rule of law. Fair, free and balanced trade based on reciprocity and mutual benefits is of key importance for both internal and external stability of the EU. Adoption of the free trade agreement with Canada serves as a splendid example. This modern and ambitious agreement shall boost the economic position of EU as well as open new trade opportunities for our citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, the only answer to the current wave of Euroscepticism is bringing closer to the citizens the benefits of EU integration. And this can be done through specific examples and tangible results. Therefore, as of the upcoming spring, we shall be facing a new challenge related to the fact that the UK may depart from the European Union, and it must be a transparent process. And the negotiations must result in a message that it makes sense, it's worthwhile to remain a member state of the EU. Otherwise, there's a threat that the negative mood in Europe shall pursue further. And this is important to be taken note of in those countries that have a strong wave of Euroscepticism. The Slovak presidency wanted to convey a very strong message and impulse to the European public. Therefore, we did our utmost to deliver tangible results that have a direct impact on the lives of each and every one of us. We wanted to prevent further fragmenting of the EU, and we did want to assure the European citizens that the EU is a project that has a future. I wish to assure you that the weight of responsibility that we perceived at the start of our presidency remains unchanged. As regards the incoming Maltese presidency, we wish them the best of luck, and hopefully their priorities will materialize, and hopefully we have facilitated the effort to attain our joint objectives. At this point, I also want to thank the Netherlands for their support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Now, for the Commission, President Juncker. Thank you, President. Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank very warmly our Slovak friends for a successful first presidency. Particularly, I would like to congratulate the Prime Minister, Robert. I'm using the familiar you, and Ivan, who was the mastermind of this presidency. Amongst the achievements of the presidency is the putting into place of the European Agreement on the Coast Guard and Border Guard, and also the fact we agreed on the European Directive on terrorism and systematic control of external borders. And this is also the directive on firearms. And the ambition of this is below the ambition of the Commission. And this is progress. And I know the commitment of the presidency and is given its best to make sure that we can agree on the commercial defence instruments, and that's a great success for the presidency. I wanted to have a debate on the rest. Since those I'd like to debate with aren't present, I'd like to thank the members of Parliament who are present, and I will distribute my speech in writing. As you wish, President. I'll begin with the debate. First of all, for the EPP group, Mrs. GROSSETÉTE.
Thank you very much, President of the Council, President of the European Commission. It's true that Slovakia took up the rotating presidency of the Council at a particularly difficult period, and yet the Slovak presidency did not sort of sit back, but continue to push a certain number of important issues. On behalf of my group, I'd like to congratulate you. In spite of the reticence of a certain number of member states, we have a robust budget, 100 billion commitments. It's minimalist, but I think we've managed to uphold the fundamentals. We've introduced improvements. The Juncker plan has been expanded. Action when it comes to external borders, the youth program increased, fight against tax fraud, modernization of trade defense instruments. So I think we've made important progress on all these fronts, but there's no sort of progress in the absence of industry. I think industry has very much been central to your presidency. I think it has to continue to be so, because I think it's a bedrock of our economy today and in the future. We need an ambitious industrial policy if we want to save jobs and encourage innovation in new technologies. And in that regard, the steps are being made when it comes to the carbon market with the introduction of low carbon technologies. We're seeing moves in the area of European space policies with a number of potential applications, including the services sector. So I think there are sort of lines are moving, as it were, and we're seeing greater cooperation in Europe's defence effort. When it comes to the railway sector, we have adopted a certain number of measures in the railway sector to make improvements when it comes to passenger transport, but also to ensure that equipment manufacturers are assisted. You talked about progress too in terms of the digital environment, with clear progress when it comes to roaming fees, whilst at the same time upholding investment, the quality of the network, access to internet. These, of course, are major concerns for all Europeans when it comes to energy, security of gas supplies. That has been and will be a central issue of discussion, and in that respect I think we need to enhance regional cooperation, exchange of information. That's European solidarity after all. I welcome the fact that Slovakia has enabled us to continue and step up the works undertaken under the Dutch presidency when it comes to access to new drugs for patients, the fight against Alzheimer and antibiotic resistance. They've been at the top of your agenda. We have also underscored the importance of vaccines in any prevention campaign. That's important when it comes to abuse of antibiotics. I have one regret, a slight personal regret, and that is that no agreement has been reached when it comes to new regulation on veterinary medicines. That is a shame, because antibiotic resistance in that field is important too. You have called for more in terms of a community spirit, fighting national egotism, and I do hope that call will not fall on deaf ears. And I'd like to thank you for all the sort of concrete measures you have put in place, and let us hope that they will be understood by European citizens so that we can fight the demagogy on the part of some who wish to suggest that the European Union is not making headway. So I think the results are palpable, they're tangible, but I think we need to be able to better communicate on areas where we have made achievements.
Now for the S&D group, Mr. MAњKA.
Distinguished President of the European Parliament, President of the European Commission, Prime Minister, colleagues. You know yourself best, Prime Minister, how much effort the two latest governments in office under your leadership put into the preparation of the Slovak presidency. With great suspense, we watched the UK referendum, which had a huge impact on the whole functioning of the EU, as well as an impact on the Slovak presidency agenda. Today, we can look back and take stock. The MEPs from various political groups, from various committees, various countries have come to the conclusion that the Slovak presidency was a success. We've heard this already today. Prime Minister, please say thank you on our behalf to the entire team, to Mr. Korčok, who was here, always present. Everybody knows him by now, all the ministry teams and everybody else involved in the presidency. I'd like to praise the political maturity, correctness, as well as common effort of more than 90% of the Slovak representatives here in the European Parliament. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for showing your effort into making sure that the presidency be a success. At the Bratislava summit in September, all the heads of states have set a very clear message that the EU, for all of them, has no other alternative. And this message is hugely powerful. The so-called Bratislava roadmap was adopted, whose aim it is to bring Europe closer to the citizens. Another great success is the speedy ratification of the Paris Climate Agreement. Considering that soon the US administration will change, we're all very glad that this document is now an internationally valid document. We've also managed to ensure the ratification of the CETA agreement with Canada. This agreement will be a template for many other similar agreements. In record time, we managed to finalize the budget of the EU for next year. The agreement was found precisely on the anniversary of our Velvet Revolution on the 17th of November at 4:30 a.m. This day, the 17th of November, is also the International Day of Students, and therefore I think it's symbolic that on that day we managed to push through 500 million into the budget for the youth employment. This project is something the Socialists and Democrats have pushed through ever since the beginning. Thanks to this initiative, we managed to decrease the number of jobless young people in the EU by 1.6 million. In Slovakia, we managed to cut the youth unemployment by almost a half. Fight against tax evasion, frauds, migration crisis, help to third countries so that their people are not forced to flee, then fight against terrorism, the new project of EU border and coast guards, strong social agenda, safe and affordable energy, digital Europe, wholesale roaming prices, help to farmers, jobs and growth in Europe. This is only a partial summary of the presidency agenda that we've managed to push forward significantly during our presidency. The Slovak presidency is now drawing to an end. Malta is now taking over. We shall continue on our common path, and the aim is still the same: to make sure that the people of Europe can live better and safer lives. Thank you.
For the ECR group, now Mr. ŠKRIPEK.
President, Prime Minister, representatives of the Commission, colleagues, let me congratulate the Slovak presidency for the work delivered. It seems that Slovakia has managed splendidly to fulfill its ambitions, and we truly, together with the help of many Slovaks that have been living abroad and returned home, we managed to put Slovakia at the forefront of attention. I think that we need to express our gratitude and deep thanks to all of those involved. Dear Prime Minister Fico, I fully agree with you that political correctness, as you refer to, is often damaging because it also casts a veil on things that are obvious. One of those questions that must be pinpointed is the relationship of Turkey and the EU. Since the July coup attempt in Turkey, there have been certain activities undertaken by the Turkish government that must be condemned by the EU. We have to speak out clearly. Freedom of media represents one of the fundamental rights, and physical violation, attacks against journalists, arresting media representatives is something that we feel as being very disturbing. Not to mention the fact that the Kurdish minority is being prosecuted. I think that we should condemn these acts of the President Erdogan. It seems as that many member states in the EU are acting a bit cowardish and not willing to speak out loud, and we need to be aware of all of the benefits that EU offers us. Nevertheless, that cannot counteract our effort to open freely and not to cast a veil on political correctness. I think that it is necessary that the Commission acts. So we have called upon the European Commission to act and condemn the cases that have occurred in Turkey. We believe that we need to stop the so-called Balkan route, and the agreement with Turkey has helped us in this effort. I think that we have to say a clear no to Turkey and what it is doing.
Now, for the ALDE group, Mr. TELIČKA.
Thank you, President, Prime Minister. First of all, let me also thank you for all the efforts that the Slovak presidency has made in order not just to make it a success, but address the issues that are still pending. And if I may just point out two issues that I will remember from your statement. One is that the domestic political agenda should not dominate over EU-related and common EU interests and affairs. And I think that this is very important, but I need to say that it still prevails. We see it basically on a daily or weekly basis. We see it in the Council, we see it in the Council groups when there are issues addressed, and suddenly we will always have an issue of so-called national interest that will prevail. Whether it is a question of addressing, opening up of the markets in the railways, whether it's digital, whatever it is, I think that we need to return in this respect to the roots that in fact show the ability to address the issues and find, let's say, common basis. The second issue that I will remember is you spoke about the EU being sovereign. If I may just add, I think that what we would like to see is an EU that is a strong player. And I think that we need still, in a major way, contribute to it. You have also referred to the American presidential elections. That is maybe a bit of uncertainty. We don't know yet what the policies will be. We heard a lot of statements that do create concerns. I would wait for the policies. And at the same time, we have threats that are from time to time expressed from Russia. I mean, these two are an invitation to the European Union to be that strong player, to be able to address the issues that are not dependent on the Americans, nor on the Russians. I mean, we focus at the trade agenda. Of course, we know what happened with TPP. We don't know yet what will happen with TTIP, but we don't have to wait. On one hand, we can negotiate with other countries, but at the same time, the new administration will come in place, and we should set a positive agenda. We should be the ones that would be co-setting, if not setting the agenda. I think we can't be caught unprepared in this respect. Another remark already has been referred to the migration crisis, sometimes too little, too slow, but we are progressing. I agree with you. But I think that we can't hide the fact that what is happening today in Turkey is completely unacceptable. This is a question of our values, and I think that we can hardly continue negotiations, accession negotiations with Turkey unless, we see a reshift in the course where Turkey is heading. At the same time, I'm in favor of setting the conditions, as we have said in the European Parliament, and reopening the negotiations once, let's say, a situation will progress in that country. Values, I think, apart from what I have said, are key. And I must say that we need to measure with the same measurement everyone. I'm glad that you have signed the agreement with Cuba, but at the same time, I would like to see in the future agreements that have the conditionality, that in fact provide concessions, but at the same time, there is really a motivation and a progress in those countries concerned. Prime Minister, one last sentence. I think that I would agree with a lot that you have said. I think that you have a new experience, and I think that on these issues that you have expressed, and some that I have added, we need a recognition champions in the Council to move beyond marginal, sometimes very partial national interests. Thank you.
For the Confederal Group of the European Left, Ms. Konečná.
Thank you, Mr. President. Prime Minister, President of the European Commission, the first presidency of the Slovak Republic unfortunately came at a very difficult time, and it's difficult in an atmosphere of the irresponsible policies of David Cameron, which led to Brexit, and they did, however, manage to calm things down a little bit as far as relations with the UK are concerned. 6 months ago, I expressed the hope that the Union would realise that the Visegrad countries were not friends of Europe. We want to live in peace and prosperity, but we have our own unique characteristics and we want them to be respected. We're not irresponsible individualists. We're not people who leave when times get tough. It's sad, but we did mention some difficulties. But Slovak diplomats managed effectively to sort out some complicated issues and avoid internal conflicts. And they managed, for example, to make it possible for farmers to work in a healthy trade environment without unfair practices. That's important for the future of the sector and the sustainable growth of the European Union. The Slovak presidency moved forward on important issues and demonstrated that a small country can do a lot of important work. Obviously, I don't agree with everything the presidency did, particularly trade agreements such as TTIP. I don't think that it's a good idea. It's a mistaken view about international trade that's going to come back and hurt our citizens. But the initial panic before the presidency began has been assuaged, Mr. President. The countries of Central and Eastern Europe don't want to be treated as second division countries, and we are not like that. And Prime Minister Fico did manage to put together a coalition which worked very quickly after the elections, and despite his health problems has led the presidency very effectively. I'd like to thank you once again. You've put together a presidency we can be proud of, and your colleagues were loyal allies in the negotiations in the European Parliament. Thanks very much.
For the Greens Group, now Mr. Lambert.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. I think you're right. Our citizens vis-à-vis the European Union are expressing fear, concern, if not growing anger. I think the referendum that took place in the UK during your presidency, I think, is a clear demonstration of that. It's not surprising when a quarter of Europeans are confronted with poverty, social exclusion, and many others are saying possibly they'll be the next to suffer a similar fate. And a lot of people, of course, are ascribing that to the European Union. So I think given that, we need a new impetus, and I think you're right. But where's it going to come from? Or where was it during your presidency, that impetus? I'm still looking for questioning of an macroeconomic policy that wants to pit workers one against the other, a sort of maniac pursuit of free trade, unreasonable austerity policies, that the cornerstones of policies being conducted. And I'm looking for the start of a sort of a fiscal, social Europe, in the absence of which monetary Europe, of course, is doomed to fail. You talk about a European Union that's leading the field when it comes to climate change. That's no longer the case, when in 2004 the European Union that represented 30% of GDP invested more than half in renewables. Today we represent only 1/5 of world GDP, but as of only 70% of investment in renewables. So we've just lackluster hangers-on. And what about a fairer, more just Europe? I find very little trace of that in the Bratislava process, which seems to turn in the direction of Defence Europe as a solution to all our problems. During the Dutch presidency and during the Slovak presidency, I think the key words when it comes to migration were sort of sending them back and keeping them at arm's length. Now, was it not you who said that you're not, it wasn't you who said that we shouldn't take in all those who fear for their lives. It was someone in Belgium, a sort of politician who I think Marine Le Pen would certainly not contest. It's been said that multicultural Europe is a failure, and those who have a different lifestyle, culture, and to boot a different religion, accommodating them is not possible. Now, if that multicultural Europe is impossible, then it is the European Union that is impossible. Because the European Union is a union that has decided to make unity and diversity its motto. The very idea underpinning the European Union is that in a small continent we have people who have different cultures, lifestyles, languages, religions, and if you state, as it appears you have, that a multicultural society isn't possible, then the European Union won't be possible. We'll never come to agreement on that. Thank you.
Now, on behalf of EFDD, Mrs. von Storch. Thank you very much indeed, President Schulz. We are talking today about the Slovak Council presidency. Well, that's great, because otherwise we probably wouldn't have understood anything more about it. The EU is in the biggest crisis it's ever faced. We need major acts, particularly if we want to win back citizens' trust. Mr. Fico, you know, there's been, we've heard about scandals, there have been financial scandals under your presidency, but you probably won't need to fear anything, because you're in the right party, the Social Democrats. But that's not acceptable. These accusations have to be clarified in exactly the same way as accusations against UKIP or the Front National, at least. Now, it's dishonest that we have two weights and measures, and it's exactly that which means that more and more people are losing their trust. If you want to better promote the EU, if you want to win back that citizens' trust, then that's where you should start. You know, we really have to start to clarify these accusations which have been raised. Now, on behalf of the ENF, Mrs. Bizzotto. Thank you, President. Well, to you colleagues and the Prime Minister of Slovakia, who is a socialist and who is in the rotating presidency, he's come here to preach morals to us. He's not listening right now, but I'd like to ask him various things. Firstly, why should Italy take up hundreds of thousands of fake migrants every year and Slovakia doesn't? Secondly, why does Slovakia receive much more money from Europe than it actually gives, whereas Italy spends or gives to the Union much more than it gets back? Over the last 10 years, the Italians have given 70 million extra euros to Brussels, more than they've received back. So let me make a proposal. This is my proposal, but also the proposal for millions of Italians. You will take up the clandestine migrants who have come into Italy at the fault of Renzi and the EU, and we'll get the money that you would have get. And, you know, for the people who've been affected by the earthquake, the elderly people, the Italians are sick and tired of the lies told by this Europe. Sick and tired of being invaded by hordes of clandestine migrants, and sick and tired of having to pay for you. We no longer want to have these clandestine migrants in our country. We want back our money. every single penny right now.
Meine Damen und Herren, die Regeln unseres Hauses.
Ladies and gentlemen, the rules of this House don't foresee that the public should actually express their approval or disapproval, so please bear this in mind. And now Mr. BALCZÓ has the floor.
Elnök úr, köszönöm a szót. Egy féléves elnökségtől nem várható el.
Thank you, President. This is a 6-month presidency. In 6 months we can't solve all problems. However, we can hope for the presidency to do something. And the problem at the moment is the migrants. And here there's a division on quotas. Mr. Fico has one point of view, and everyone knows his point of view. In September, he said that the quota requirement was at an end. It was no good. He said quotas no longer exist and never will exist. Having said that, this week European politicians have again been talking about solidarity and responsibility. So it seems to me that responsibility applies to all when we are receiving clandestine migrants in the Union, because someone is going to have to pay for the 250 euros. Somebody has to help Hungary to protect the borders.
And now for the Commission, Mr. Juncker.
Okay, dann hat das Wort für den Rat Herr Fico.
And now for the Council, Mr. Fico.
Ďakujem pekne, veľmi stručne, dámy a páni. Ja som veľmi rád, že tu prevláda väčšinový názor.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to hear what everyone has to say, that the majority felt that the Slovak presidency has made a specific contribution to the European Union over these past 6 months. And I hope that we were able to realize our slogan, Good Ideas Slovakia. But that wouldn't have been possible without the good cooperation with the European Parliament. We have had very good cooperation. And I would like to thank you very much on behalf of the Slovak presidency. And I would also like to address the President of the Parliament, Martin. Dear Martin, we've had very good cooperation, very open cooperation, and I think it was very helpful to have the European Commission at our side. And I think that is something that would be confirmed by the President of the Commission. I think I can safely say that our professional relations were, are, and will continue to be professional and in the interest of all. Without leadership, no institution can exist. And so for that reason, I would like to thank you very much, dear Jean-Claude. We have really sensed your support and also the support of the whole Commission. And I would like to wish all the best to the incoming Maltese presidency. I am convinced that during their presidency and in cooperation in the future with you, the document that we have with the priorities for 2017 will be very useful. So once again, thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister Fico. That closes the debate. Thank you.